In this tutorial video about the EPQ, we're going to be talking about what you need to do to make sure you submit your EPQ correctly and you've included everything you need. So we're going to talk about what you need to submit, how you go about submitting it at Headington, and some common issues to be aware of so that you can plan ahead and make sure everything goes smoothly. As always, you can press the pause button, do email if you've got any questions once you've watched the whole video. So, in terms of what to submit, we've been saying this since you started your EPQ. But remember, in order to get an EPQ, you need to submit three things. You need to submit your final product, so whether that's your artifact and accompanying report or just your 5,000 word report. You need to submit your completed production log, and that is the document that we are completing via Project Q. And you need to print it out at the end, and we'll go through details about how to do that. And there needs to be evidence of your EPQ presentation submitted as well. So those are the three things that must be submitted. So if we talk about them in a little bit more detail, in terms of your final product, some things to remember: please include your word count for your report, whether that's the 5,000 word report or the report accompanying your artifact. In both cases, please include a word count on your title page at the front. It's often best practice to include a contents page, especially with the 5,000 word reports, because they're quite long. You might want to see what sections are on what page and so on, especially if you're including figures, illustration, graphs, etc. Obviously, always worth checking, might sound obvious, but always worth a check, that you have included your references in your final report, whether that's the accompanying report to your artifact or your 5,000 word report. This is a research project. A huge part of what we've been doing in the Taught Skills programme and encouraging you to do in your own independent research is to make sure that you are citing and referencing the sources that you have found as part of your research. So that reference list has to be in there. And then also, if you're completing an artifact project, evidence of the artifact, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in a moment. It's maybe not quite as obvious as it sounds. There's quite a few examples of different ways that this could be done, but evidence of your final artifact. When we were talking about the completed production log, this, because we are really fortunate and have access to Project Q, is a relatively simple process in terms of printing it out, and I will show you where to click on Project Q to do that. And then in terms of evidence of your EPQ presentation, this the bare minimum that you need to do is you need to complete presentation record part A. Your supervisor submits and completes presentation record part B, so you don't need to worry about part B. You do need to do part A. You may well, though, also want to include in the appendices. Quite often people include printouts of the slides that they used in their presentation. They don't have to be full A4 size for each slide. Be selective about what you're including. It might be that you want to include a couple of really good slides. Might be that you wanted to do the slide printout option with the notes on the side that you've annotated. A couple of things like that. Sometimes people, if they made notes, planning notes for their presentation, they might choose to include those as well. We will talk a little bit more about how you decide what to include and what not to include. But remember, you do have to include evidence of the presentation, so have that clearly on your radar. Now, in terms of the final product and evidence of your artifact, if you've completed an artifact project, the first thing I want you to do is make sure that you have a discussion with your supervisor about how you are going to submit evidence of your artifact. Your supervisor throughout the whole process has been there to give you advice and to listen to your ideas and to kind of troubleshoot any obvious problems that might come about. This is a really, really important time to discuss your ideas with your supervisor, because they have got a clear understanding about what the exam board require in terms of evidence, and they've got a clear understanding of your artifact, and so they're in a really good position to help advise you on these sorts of decisions. A couple of things though for you to bear in mind: if you are going to try and submit a video or any other sort of digital file to the exam board, they would like it on a CD-ROM. Now, I know that's starting to feel a little bit old school, but that is what they are still saying in their specification document, and so that is what we are going to do. So any digital files that you want to submit need to be on a CD-ROM, and they need to be in an easily readable format. And by that, I mean I would need to be able to take that CD-ROM, pop it into, and this is getting increasingly difficult, a computer with a CD drive, and the file format Windows or Mac should be able to cope with without downloading a new type of software to read that file. So have a little think about that. That might need a little bit of planning. You might need to go and get yourself some writable CD-ROMs or some DVDs. You might need to try and track down a computer that's got a CD drive on it, so that you can do that if you don't have one on your laptop. So, this point is not quite as simple as it seems. It does need some planning out. If you are taking photographs of your artifact, maybe you've produced a bit of artwork or a piece that needs photographing and you're going to submit the evidence as photographs, really invest some time in thinking about the best way to print out those photographs, to display those photographs. How many photographs are you going to put on a page? How large are they going to be? Are they going to be in colour? Are they going to be annotated? Do they need subheadings or titles? Do they need like a little sort of author note next to them? You put a lot of work in to your artifact so far. Don't spoil it at the last minute by rushing right at the end. The evidence of the artifact is very important. The external moderators and examinators don't get to come into school and see your artifact. They just see the evidence that you have provided of the artifact. So think about it really carefully. In the past, we've had artifacts that involve computer code. So have a think about how you want to print out and display that code that you have written, because that's part of your artifact. Don't rush it at the end. Again, think about whether it needs annotations or sort of author notes to explain different bits of it, what format you're going to print it out in, and so on. And then sort of this point here, evidence that you've successfully completed your aim. Since the very beginning of your artifact, we've been encouraging you to have a really clear idea about what you wanted to achieve. And at the end of an artifact project, the exam board want to see that you have gone about working out, you've collected some sort of evidence or something that demonstrates whether you have been successful in your objectives for the artifact. So discuss this point with your supervisor. Hopefully this has been built into your project and your plan from the beginning, but if not, have a discussion about it now. How are you going to show that the artifact has been successful? If you've organised an event as your artifact, have a think about what evidence would be best to supply for that. Did you take photos at the event? Have you got people to give feedback of the event? How are you going to present that evidence? And then finally, do make sure that you have a conversation with your supervisor and that you check whether they need access to your artifact, because quite often what your supervisor will organise is for a subject expert to look at your artifact and evaluate how successful it's been, and then they refer to that feedback in their marking. So for example, if you've written a computer code, we might get a member of the computing department to give us feedback as non-specialists about how successful it is. If you have produced a piece of artwork, we will get members of the art department to give us feedback about how successful it is. So do just have that conversation with your supervisor about what access to your artifact your supervisor needs in order to organise those different feedback documents. So we've talked about the final product and what evidence we need there. And we also said that we need evidence of your presentation and we need evidence of your project log. Now, your project log you are completing via the piece of software called Project Q. And I've got a sort of a screenshot of that here. So we've got our different sections here. of your project log, and we can see which bits have been signed off and so on. Please remember, this document is such an important part of your EPQ. You have to complete it. There is just no possibility of handing in this document with blank spaces. So please go through and make sure that this is complete, is my first request. So next thing, you need to make sure that all these bits here are finished, apart from presentation record part B, because your supervisor does that. Your supervisor will have done supervisor proposal part B, and the coordinator will have done part C, coordinator approval, and that would have happened long before this process. So you need to make sure your mid-project review is all sorted, as we've mentioned lots of times before. Make sure the title there matches your final title. You need to have had your product review meeting with your supervisor, which we mentioned in the previous video. You've done your presentation part A, so that's great. So that means we were on the summary and reflection, which we also talked about in the previous video, in terms of sort of imagining that you've got a little checklist of things to talk about. And then that just leaves us with the candidate declaration. There's a really helpful submission checklist that they've given you of things to check that you've included, so do use that. We will sort out the document with the list of taught skills and the things that you've learnt in your lessons that were accompanying your EPQ, and then we fill in the record of marks as well. So don't worry about these last two. Do use the submission checklist to help you, and make sure that you have done these here. Again, if there are any concerns or queries, contact your supervisor. Now, in terms of how you print this out, you are going to go to download production log and click here, okay? So you have thought carefully about what evidence you are going to submit. You have got evidence of your final product. You've printed out your project log from Project Q, and there is evidence of your presentation. So let's have a little chat about now how to submit your project. Obviously, different schools will have different systems. So this is what's going on at Headington. So we would like you to submit a paper copy of everything. So that's your final product, your project log, and evidence of your presentation, and any other evidence you've decided to include. A paper copy of that goes to your supervisor, and an electronic copy is submitted via the assignment on the Google Classroom. Okay, so both of those need to be submitted on the deadline that has been set for your year group. Okay, a couple of things to have a think about, because you can include additional evidence if you want to. They can go in the appendices. There's clear evidence and notation in the specification and all of the guidance that we receive from the exam board that they want you to be selective about what you submit, even to the point where they say be wary of students that just hand in everything, because it might show that the project hasn't been well managed. So bear that in mind. They don't want you to submit every piece of paper or every document you have made during this project. They want to see you being selective. However, at the same time, it's a balancing act. Do be thorough. Use the marking criteria. We need to provide evidence of all of the different statements that they have put in the top band, hopefully, of the marking criteria. So use the marking criteria as a checklist. If you're not sure if there's any evidence of evaluating and selecting sources in other parts of your project, so for example your final product or your project log, why not pick one page of your research diary that has some evidence on there of you saying, yes, I will use this source, or no, I won't use this source because, and just include that one page of your research diary. And then it's just very obvious that there is evidence, but we don't need maybe all 10 pages of your research diary. Pick one page and be selective. Remember, if you're going to include additional documents to supply evidence in the appendices, you have to mention those appendices in either the project log or the final product. So for example, if you wanted to include a page of your research diary to show that you were selecting sources to use in your project, somewhere in your project log, maybe in the initial ideas section or in the planning review, you might mention that there are, for example, in one case it might be that there's lots of different types of sources to choose from, so you're having to be quite selective, and you can, like as you can see in my research diary in the appendices, and then that's absolutely fine. But everything in the appendices needs to be mentioned in either your project log or your final product. You might want to have a think about other things that you could include as evidence. We've mentioned maybe a page out of your research diary. We've mentioned maybe some evidence of the slides or annotated slides from your presentation. Is there anything else that would be useful? You can certainly include it if it would be helpful. Depending on the project, different things might be useful. But again, remember to be selective, but make sure there is evidence of everything that's needed on the marking criteria. And if you have any queries, this is a great opportunity to use the experience and expertise of your supervisor. So finally, moving on to some common issues to be aware of. Project queue. When you export your production log, so you've clicked on this button that says download production log, and then this window here comes up and it says export, and it says click the export button to export it into exam board format. So you click on here and it says before submission, complete any missing sections, which we've sort of previously spoken about, remove blank pages and tidy up the presentation, print, sign and forward to your supervisor. This remove blank pages, if you don't make any edits to the document that you export, you tend to find that every other page is half empty. Invest 10 minutes and save some trees, and just sort that out, because it's just not necessary. It makes it look a bit rushed. If you're aiming for the highest marks and therefore grades available, attention to detail at this last stage is just as important as attention to detail was at every other stage. So invest 10 minutes, save some paper, save some trees, and it looks really slick. You can, in your sort of student details, enter your candidate number. This will save you writing it on each page. So take a moment to do that as well. If you're not sure, please ask Miss Co. And then if I show you the next part as well, a really, really important part of submitting your EPQ is a realisation that you are going to get the equivalent of half an A level, and you're not being examined on that qualification. So you're not going to sit an EPQ exam. So your EPQ is what is known as a non-examined assessment, or an NEA. So it's all coursework essentially. Now, JCQ, the body which oversees all the different exam boards that award qualifications, has got very strict regulations on non-examined assessments and the requirements that go along with it. Now, when you started your EPQ, we went through these with you so that you had a clear understanding of what you were and weren't allowed to do. But just to sort of bring into context why this candidate declaration is so important. So the first sort of page that you get once you print out your production log from Project Q is the candidate declaration form. So hopefully the centre number and the centre name will have come out in the print. They might not have, in which case we can add them in. Your candidate number goes in here, and if you've entered it into Project Q, it will get printed out for you. And your full name goes in here. Now, if we read this grey bit here together, work submitted for assessment must be the candidate's own. If candidates copy work, allow candidates to copy for them, or cheat in any other way, they may be disqualified. So you then have to declare, and it says here, have you received help or information from anyone other than the subject teachers to produce this work? So here, by subject teacher, we're talking about your supervisor. Now, bear in mind, because of the work that we've done on avoiding plagiarism, citing and referencing your sources, the answer to this should be no, because every other source should be referenced and cited fully in your report. So if it isn't no, please could you come and discuss this situation with me as soon as possible. So you can put down here any books, leaflets or other materials that you haven't acknowledged in the work itself. Again, we should have been referencing it, so this shouldn't be the case, but if it is, put them in here. And then this signature here is really important. This is you declaring faithfully that you have abided by the regulations set out by JCQ. Knowingly signing this when you haven't is a huge issue and has lots of ramifications. So please do take this declaration seriously and make sure you sign this. If there's no signature, you are not getting your EPQ because you haven't declared that it's your work according to the exam board. So this is a really important document. Please make sure that it is completed properly and that we don't have to chase you up about this. And your supervisor, once you've handed it in, will then declare that to the best of their knowledge it's your own work as well. So just to summarise that in writing, please make sure your candidate declaration sheet is signed. It's a really important document because of the JCQ regulations for non-examined assessments. If there is no signature, there's no EPQ. So this is really important. It's not something to look over. So there we have key things to bear in mind and make sure you've done properly when submitting your EPQ. Although it may feel as though you've done so much work up until this point, this last bit, essentially printing it out, couldn't possibly take that long. It is always best practice, and very much so when you, if you go off to university, to give yourself at least 48 hours to make sure that printing can be done. If you are at university and a whole year group of students is trying to submit a project to a deadline, you will actually find it much more difficult than you may think to get hold of a printer that is full of toner and paper. And there can be all sorts of things that mean that process is much slower than it would normally be if there is a year group submission. So please give yourself enough time to do this properly. Please don't rush right at the end. Please leave yourself enough time to contact your supervisor and ask for advice if needed. If your supervisor has got many other commitments alongside being your supervisor, if you email on the morning of the deadline and ask for their help, they might be teaching, they might not be able to help you. So please be thoughtful and considerate and sensible with the notice that you give them that you would like to have a discussion as the deadline approaches. As always, if there are any questions, please email your supervisor or email the centre coordinator, myself. Good luck. You are so close. You have done so well and you are so nearly there. And then make sure you have a little plan about how to celebrate after you submitted as well, because it's been a very long year and you've been fantastic and brilliant. Well done.